make some sort of directive not permitting any other ex-parte expressions unless they have the consent of the legislature.
House Speaker T.K. Weatherall was out of town today on personal business. However, Representative Bo Johnson, the House Rules Chairman, said this is the first he's heard about it.
And there's been some work on the part of House Counsel to determine whether that appropriate forum is the Supreme Court or the federal court. It's not an area I've had an opportunity to explore, and I haven't been apprised of our legal position, but I feel a real responsibility to see that we handle our legislative talent and responsibility at hand, and that is to develop a fair reapportionment plan for House and Senate. If we do that job right, the legal matters will fall into place.
Representative DeGrande plans to meet with House and Senate leadership over this letter, which he calls unfair. House Speaker T.K. Weatherall is expected back in town tomorrow. Meanwhile, the request has had no impact on the ongoing proceedings in federal court. Cindy Smith, Florida Public Television.
Late this afternoon, the Florida Supreme Court responded by setting a schedule for filing briefs and hearing oral arguments when it receives a joint resolution of reapportionment. The reapportionment bill finally went to the House floor late this afternoon. Darwin Gamble has the story.
The House got down to business quickly.
Members, if you will take your seats, and cease your conversations, we will get an update about where we're at.
The Committee on Reapportionment has heard House Joint Resolution 1G and has passed the product from committee. It is available to us, and there has been a request from the minority leader that we give an extension of time so that members might have until the hour of 5 p.m. to file amendments. We have been supportive of his request in that it will give full opportunity for members to participate in the process. We would then expect to convene the House at the hour of 10 a.m. tomorrow. The bill would be on special order calendar on second reading. It would be the only item before the House. The amendments would then be in proper form, and they would be available for review as of approximately 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, so that every member would have an opportunity to fully consider the amendments that would come before the House on second reading tomorrow. If the membership would be willing, we could roll the bill to third reading for the afternoon and pass it out. The members could then go home for the weekend, would not have to come back to town until such time that the Senate will have acted on their product of reapportionment. Now, if the members are not willing to roll it to third reading, we would plan to come in Saturday morning around 8 a.m. and have the final passage of the product at that time.
Mr. Silver?
Mr. Speaker. yeah. Mr. Rules Chairman, are you ready for this question? On these veto messages, I'm unclear as to, no, okay. on a more serious matter. You had mentioned the fact about going from second to third reading tomorrow, and then coming back at 8 o'clock Saturday morning, I believe, if we didn't go to the third reading. I guess my question is, have you received any indication on whether or not there's going to be agreement? I guess I would probably have to ask that to the minority leader, because I'm sure the majority is willing to do that. And if we did come back at 8 o'clock in the morning, it would seem to me that the better course of action would be to come back at 12:01 that day, rather than having us have to spend extra dollars of taxpayers' money, which is, I guess, calculated somewhere about $40,000 a day, just because of, for no reason whatsoever that I can see, unless somebody can give me a good reason.
Mr. Johnson, do you want to comment on it?
Well, I think we'll have a good feel for that tomorrow. I think the minority leader has asked for an opportunity to fully consider the amendments that would be filed, and I understand that if they're considered in a manner that gives full participation, that they might be willing to consider the opportunity to roll to third, but they have not made a commitment, neither have we asked for one.
This is not really a good time to run up there and think you're going to draw an amendment from scratch between now and 5 p.m. I think the extension was really for the purpose of clarifying for all the members, and I know with some of the minority members from committee today, clarifying exactly which of their previously drawn amendments they want to submit for floor consideration. So I don't particularly want this to be an open invitation to come up and draw, because the system is operating right now in processing amendments that have been submitted, and we just want the opportunity for those to be processed and for the members to specify which of their previously submitted amendments are going to be offered tomorrow.
Mr. Goodforth.
And the motion to stand in recess passed. Darwin Gamble, Florida Public Television.
And that's our program for tonight. The House is set to reconvene in the morning at 10 o'clock. The Senate is out until Monday afternoon at 1:30. We'll be here to keep you posted on all the action on your public television stations, reaching 99% of Florida's population. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Local broadcast of this program is made possible in part by the members of WEDU.
The shaky economy means a squeeze on the bottom line and a shakeout for workers on the front line. I'm Bonnie Urbay. Join me and panelists like Kate O'Byrne of the Heritage Foundation and economist Julianne Malveaux for a lively debate on the economy next time on To the Contrary.
Next time on Masterpiece Theater.
Dear Mr. Lovelace, if you are in earnest to assist me, come to the Garden Gate on Monday evening after nightfall.
Samuel Richardson's tale of virtue and deceit. Clarissa on Masterpiece Theater.
Join us on a voyage of discovery into the world of computers as we begin a new 5-part series, The Machine That Changed the World.
Where does sanity end and madness begin? Does madness reside in the brain or in the imagination? Can mental illness be treated as a physical disease? Join Jonathan Miller for a 5-part journey into madness.
The rules that govern the game have created a tax system that is firmly weighted against the middle class.
The people in Washington are so far out of touch.
Listening to you, I think you still believe in democracy.
I don't trust any of them.
You're watching member-supported public television, WEDU.
Local broadcast of this program is made possible in part by the members of WEDU.
Good evening. I'm Jim Lehrer in Washington.
And I'm Robert McNeil in New York. After the news summary this Thursday, House Speaker Tom Foley talks about congressional scandals and public reaction. Next, the return of a once-controlled disease, tuberculosis. We have a documentary report and excerpts from today's Washington hearing. Finally, as the trial of Manuel Noriega nears its end, we update the U.S. case against the Panamanian dictator.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. PepsiCo and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And viewers like you.
The government finally got John Gotti today. A jury in New York City convicted the mob boss on all counts of murder, racketeering, gambling, loan sharking, obstruction of justice, bribery, and tax fraud. It was the fourth time the federal government brought him to trial. The first time, a key witness refused to testify against him. He was acquitted twice after that. One of his murder victims was Gambino crime family boss Paul Castellano. His death in 1985 cleared the way for Gotti to take control of that mafia family. Gotti now faces a maximum of 3 life terms plus 105 years in prison. A co-defendant was also convicted today of murder and racketeering. Lawyers for both said they would appeal. Robin?
The State Department today cleared Israel of charges it had supplied China with U.S. Patriot missile technology. A 17-member team of U.S. officials visited Israel to investigate the allegations, which were made public in recent newspaper reports. State Department spokeswoman Margaret Tutwiler had this to say.
Those who leaked intelligence reports owe both the United States government and the Israeli government an apology. Our team found no evidence that Israel had transferred a Patriot missile or Patriot missile technology. We plan no further action on this question with Israel and consider the matter closed.
18 Palestinians were wounded today by Israeli gunfire in the occupied Gaza Strip. The Palestinians were protesting a bloody clash with Israeli troops yesterday. That one left 4 Palestinians dead and more than 50 wounded. UN officials said the Israelis opened fire in a crowded refugee market after they were attacked with firebombs. PLO officials today demanded United Nations protection for Palestinians living in the occupied territories. State Department spokeswoman Tutwiler said Israel and the Arab countries have agreed to a 5th round of peace talks. They'll be held in Washington starting April 27th. She also said the countries have submitted lists of possible cities for a 6th round of talks, expected to be held closer to the region.
Protesters firebombed the Venezuelan embassy in Tripoli, Libya today and demonstrated outside other embassies. The unrest was aimed at countries which approved UN sanctions against Libya 2 days ago. We have a report narrated by Richard Vaughn of Worldwide Television News.
The Italian embassy in Tripoli was one of several targeted by the protesters. Demonstrators flooded into the city in convoys of cars and buses. Some appeared to be given a police escort. The demonstration was noisy, but never violent, unlike those at the Russian and Venezuelan missions. But unlike those countries, Italy is not a member of the UN Security Council that imposed the sanctions. It appears that their mission was targeted because the Italians represent British business interests. Britain spoke out strongly in favor of sanctions and voted for them, but it has no functioning embassy in the country. America was instrumental in having the measures passed. Its embassy is slowly falling into disrepair. The Belgians now handle American interests. They, like the Italians, were besieged by protesters.
The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Thomas Pickering, called those attacks outrageous. The Security Council met an emergency session this afternoon to strongly condemn them and to order Libya to prevent any more from happening. It also demanded Libya pay for the destruction of Venezuela's embassy.
Defense Secretary Dick Cheney today said the U.S. was pleased by a new plan from Russia to sharply reduce its armed forces. The plan was presented to Cheney by Boris Yeltsin's top military advisor earlier this week. Under it, the Russian forces would be cut by more than half to about 1.2 million members. The forces would also abandon their attack posture and switch to a much more defensive mode. Meanwhile, Yeltsin's top economic advisor was sacked today. Yegor Gaidar was the main architect of Russia's free market reforms. He lost his job as finance minister after public criticism of those reforms. Yeltsin later said he was not planning a retreat from Russia's transition to a free market economy. Public anger over that transition spilled onto the streets of St. Petersburg today. Thousands of demonstrators protested against a decree that will break up many state enterprises. The protesters said that it would only add to already high unemployment.
In U.S. economic news, first-time claims for unemployment benefits rose for a second week in a row. The Labor Department said 456,000 claims were filed last week. In another report, orders to U.S. factories were up. The Commerce Department said orders for both durable and non-durable goods rose 0.5% in February. The House Ethics Committee last night released the names of 22 past and present members who repeatedly wrote bad checks at the House Bank. The release raised the tension level at today's weekly meeting of House Democrats. Congressman Robert Torricelli of New Jersey said it was very rough, as tense a session as he'd ever seen. We'll talk with House Speaker Tom Foley about the bank scandal and other issues right after this news summary.
The space shuttle Atlantis returned to Earth this morning. It landed at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. The 7 astronauts on board spent 9 days photographing and studying the Earth's atmosphere. Scientists hope the research will reveal more about global warming and ozone depletion.
The Prime Minister of France resigned today. Edith Cresson was the first woman to ever hold that office, and she held it for just 10 months. Her governing Socialist Party had suffered several recent election defeats. She was replaced today by the country's finance minister.
In this country's politics, the final results from the main Democratic presidential caucuses are in, and the winner is Jerry Brown. Unofficial returns from the February caucuses had given the state to former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas by less than 1 point. But some local officials were slow to return their paperwork, and the final tally today went to Brown by 1.4%. That's our summary of the news. Next, a newsmaker interview with Speaker Tom Foley, the return of TB, and the case again.
The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tom Foley, is first tonight. He presides over an institution caught in a political and public storm over kited checks at the House Bank, irregularities at the House Post Office, and other allegations about perks and mismanagement. Polls show public confidence in Congress to be at an historic low. Surveys conclude its members are out of touch. Insider Washington stories say Republicans are looking for a villain, Democrats for a scapegoat, and Tom Foley, who came to the House of Representatives 27 years ago as the representative from the 5th District of the state of Washington, may be it for both. He is with us now for a newsmaker interview. Are you feeling like a scapegoat, Mr. Speaker?
No, it's a challenging time for the House, for the country. There are issues that the public has been concerned about for some time. There are issues that we're trying to address in the Congress. Economic issues, the problems of recession and lack of growth in our economy, the problems of health care, the problems of dealing with our education, our infrastructure, of crime. Those things are the preoccupation of the country and the preoccupation, frankly, of the members. Recently, there have been concerns about the operation of the House Bank and Post Office, as you mentioned, and we are setting those things right. I've just sworn in a postmaster, the executive assistant to the Postmaster General of the United States, who will place the post office under the best of management. We are working now with Republicans in a bipartisan task force to bring forth next week a new organization of non-legislative services at the House, so that all the support services that serve the House of Representatives will be put under the best and most appropriate management. And then we want to get back to the issues that the people elected the Congress to deal with, not with the internal management of the House, but with the great issues that the country faces. And I think that's the frustration many members have. They want to deal with those issues that the country wants them to deal with.
How do you assess your own responsibility for these problems in the bank and the post office?
Well, if we go back to the time that I was sworn in the summer of 1989, in December of that year, I was approached by the Comptroller General, asked for an appointment, and told me that at that time that he had concern about the operation of the House Bank, and told me in particular that he had concern about the then Sergeant-at-Arms cashing checks in the House Bank and other employees. He was more focused on check overdrafts or insufficient fund checks by employees of the House than by members. But I immediately informed the leaders in both parties. I called the Sergeant-at-Arms in. He promised to take immediate action. Within 2 days' time, he wrote a letter promising a restructuring of the bank procedures to the Comptroller General's deputy. And 1 week after we came back into session, December we were out of session, on January 31st, he wrote to me, the Sergeant-at-Arms, a complete statement of new procedures and new written procedures. All of this had been worked out with the General Accounting Office and with private banking consultants. We thought we had this problem resolved.
But this did not touch on the issue of members writing
Yes,
checks,
it had at that point in January procedures both for restricting overdrafts by members as well as those who might otherwise use the bank. You have to understand this institution is a very old one. The House Bank is really somewhat of a misnomer. It's a payroll office that started in existence in 1838 and for a number of years had the policy of allowing members of Congress who are paid at the end of the month rather than at the beginning of the month. They're paid, in other words, for work they've already performed rather than for work they're about to perform, to draw on their next month's salary. And so they did, in fact, permit overdrafts. This has been going on for at least 50 years, up to the level of the next month's salary. And because of that practice, the bank was not efficient in recording members' deposits on time in many cases. I don't make any excuses for the operation of the bank, but we go back to 1954. The last Republican speaker was faced with exactly the same recommendations by the General Accounting Office. He chose to do nothing about it. I took action which I thought was corrective and which would lead to a solution to the problem. Unfortunately, after that action in January of 1990, the procedures that I thought and the General Accounting Office thought had been carried out by the bank, and assurances were given that they were being carried out, were in fact not being carried out. And those existing practices of that were supposed to be corrected were in fact not corrected. And a year later, when the General Accounting Office did its next audit at the bank, they had to come forward and say that they thought that there had obviously been a failure to implement those instructions which we had been assured had been given. And at that point, the controversy reached the public dimension, and the bank was ordered closed last October, and the Sergeant-at-Arms has since resigned.
Do you believe that the public reaction to this is right on target?
I think the public reaction is understandable but mistaken. For example, many people think that public money was involved. None was. Many people think that the taxpayers somehow were covering members' checks. They weren't. The members who deposited their payroll checks in this so-called bank were the ones that were carrying the burden of any overdrafts from any other member. They were also not paid any interest on their accounts, which is typical of modern banking practices. So the members were not trading on the public's money. No taxpayers' losses resulted from this, no actual losses to anyone. But the practice is difficult to defend in a modern circumstance. And for that reason, it was decided last October that we should order the bank closed and order the Ethics Committee to review the individual accounts of members to determine whether any other further action should be taken.
Do you personally now believe that the practice of allowing members to write overdrafts for no fees, etc., was in fact wrong?
I think it was a mistaken policy. I think what we should have had is a system similar to commercial banking operations where members could deposit their salary checks or make other deposits and be paid interest for them as they would be in a normal bank, and then to have overdraft protection if they wrote above their accounts and pay interest on that as they do in a normal bank. What should have happened, and I hope you know, in looking at other aspects of the bank, of the house operations, we can see that this is the standard of the future, that there be no special or unique circumstances for members of Congress in dealing with their life in Capitol Hill that aren't related to their jobs. That the so-called, you know, special privileges, if one wants to think of this as a special privilege, simply be eliminated unless it has some immediate relevance to doing the job.
And now, isn't that the heart of the issue? Isn't that what's really caused the public reaction, the allegation that you all were so out of touch with the rest of the country that you didn't realize that you thought you were entitled to this, and it never occurred to you there was anything wrong?
I think there was a thought that members had when they came in that this was a practice that had been going on for decades, for generations, that it was balanced, if you wish, by the fact that members didn't get any interest on their accounts, that it was not something that was seen as some tremendous privilege or other. You know, the notion that somehow comes out of some of these discussions, that the members of the House of Representatives or the Senate are living a peculiar and removed life of luxury and privilege, totally different than the experience that members have. This is one of the hardest working jobs I know in government. People who come to Congress come of their own choice, and they don't have any apology to make to anybody for holding this office. They seek it. But it's a 7-day-a-week job. It involves travel back to their districts. Overwhelmingly, they are people of not only the highest integrity, but the hardest working commitment to the constituents that send them to Congress. This view of some kind of removed and isolated and privileged community is totally false. It's just a false image.
But I'm sure you're aware of the poll, the CBS New York Times poll that just came out today, in fact, said that only 17% of the people approved of the job the Congress was doing. And a third of those people thought that, a third thought that 1/3 of the members of the House and Senate were financially corrupt. That's the public perception of you and your colleagues.
That, to some extent, is a sad truth because it is not true. The perception does exist. The reality does not. As I say, looking at it from the experience of a member who served for 27 years in the Congress, it is astounding to me that the public would think that members in large numbers are corrupt. And I think that ought to be put against the fact that they don't think that about their own member. The person that they know best, the person that they have elected or their community citizens have elected, they think is a person of honor and nobility, if not nobility perhaps, but honor and hard work and honesty. And that's what's reflected in these polls as well. It's the other people, those that they do not elect, that serve in other districts, that there's great doubt about. And that's a problem for the institution as a whole. But very frankly...
Isn't it more than just a problem? Isn't it a crippling...
Well, I hope it doesn't become a crippling fact. I don't want to diminish the fact that I'm very sad to see these results, and I don't believe they reflect any kind of reality of the institution. But to put it in some context, Congress is an anonymous institution for people. When you talk about the presidency, that means George Bush. Or even the president doesn't get approval figures in the 50% level or above for his handling of the economy or the job from time to time. But the Congress is not immediately personalized for people because it's 435 House members and 100 senators. The most relevant question is, what do they think of their own representative? What do they think the person, man or woman, Republican or Democrat, that serves as their representative in Congress? And by very substantial polling all over the country, people still think highly and still favorably of their representative.
It's been said on this program and elsewhere since all of this broke on the bank thing that the bank thing is just the last of many things, that there was already this negative perception of the Congress of the United States. It's been fed by all kinds of things, even by members themselves. Some of those most severest critics are from the Senate and the House themselves. Senator Warren Redmond announced last week he wasn't going to run for re-election. He was questioning whether or not, as a senator of from the New Hampshire, he was part of the problem instead of the solution.
Well, Warren Redmond's a man I admire very much. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but I think he gave tremendous service in the Senate. He said at the same time that he thought while he was frustrated, he wasn't impossibly frustrated. And there are tough problems we've been dealing with. Senator Redmond dealt with those problems as I and others did over the deficit, over the budget agreement and other areas. And I think when he honestly said that the problems have had, in his judgment, assessment of responsibility for the president as well as the Congress, for the former president as well as the present Congress, for Democrats and Republicans together. We are facing some difficult choices in the country. Those choices aren't easy in a time of economic recession and pressure. And we understand, I think everyone who serves in Congress understands the pain and the anxiety and the frustration that Americans feel. One of the charges that I would say not guilty to is the charge that members of Congress are out of touch. Of all the people that represent legislatures around the world, members of the House and Representatives and the Senate are the most in touch. They travel back to their districts, they meet with their constituents, they're available in Washington to them. We have a tradition of that goes back a very long time. And that's the reason, I think, that when people look at their own representative or senator, they take a totally different view than when they deal with the institution. Why is the institution in so much disrespect as it sometimes appears to be? For one, it's the anonymous institution. Secondly, it's been a butt of criticism and jokes even, going back to the foundation of the country. The important thing to remember, however, is that the Congress is the fundamental institution of American democracy. Other countries have presidents, even presidents they elect. But the unique element of the American democracy is the fact that we send representatives and senators to Washington to be an equal branch of government, to be a separate and equal branch of government, and to represent the people's interests and concerns. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And they are owed an explanation about these recent reports about the post office and about the House Bank. I think they can be given if the public will listen. I don't defend the continuation of the House Bank as an institution. In fact, I and others recommended that it be closed last fall. And it's unfortunate that the things that I put in motion, along with the General Accounting Office, were not accomplished to deal with the problem earlier. But we are going to correct those problems in any that remain in the management of the House of Representatives. We're going to deal with any kind of so-called perquisites of office other than those that are required by the job itself. And then we're going to do the legislation that needs to be done in health, in education, in the problems of crime, and the problems of energy, and the problems of the economy of this country. And that's what people got elected to do, not to be a management committee for the House of Representatives.
Back to you for a few moments, in a more personal way. A unnamed leading Democrat in the House was quoted in one of your home state newspapers in Seattle today as saying that maybe your wife, Heather, should step aside as your unsalaried chief of staff, that might help clear the air. What do you think about that piece of advice?
Well, I don't, frankly, think it's good advice. My wife, Heather, has served as my chief of staff for over 20 years. And she's served with extraordinary capacity and distinction, and been a wonderful assistance to me in all my responsibilities as a member of Congress and a member of leadership. She is a lawyer. She's qualified to carry on this responsibility. The only difference is she's not paid. And that decision was taken a long time ago when we could have had a situation where she could have joined my staff before we were married and continued to be paid under the statutes of the United States afterwards. But we made the decision that she shouldn't do that, and she served all of this time with great qualification and distinction in my judgment. And to point to my wife as some kind of mistake on my part in making her chief of staff, I just don't accept. And I think it would be wrong entirely to suggest that she should step aside. I'm not going to do that. I take the responsibility for all of my staff, the chief of staff and every person on the staff, and I have no interest or desire to make any other choice.
There are an increasing number of stories, some today again, that the day may come when these leading Democrats in the House of Representatives may come to you and say, Mr. Speaker, you're a terrific guy, you've done a great job, but if we don't do something, we're all going to go down the tubes in November. For the good of the institution and the good of the party and for the good of all of us in this room, would you step aside? Have you picked up any whiffs of that?
No, not at all. A member of the Democratic Party was on the floor today and suggested that I not run again for Speaker next year. And my answer to that is that I intend to run again for Congress and for Speaker, but my preoccupation is with doing the job I have now. I'm the Speaker of this Congress, and I'm dealing with the problems that face this Congress. And I'm determined that this Congress have two characterizations by the time it concludes this fall. One of them is a reform Congress. I believe that, difficult though the path has been, we are going to establish important and significant reforms in the way the House is managed. And secondly, that we have continued to face the problems that the country needs faced and dealt with, the problems, as I say, of energy and health, and those things that people talk about over the dinner table. Sure. Not whether this or that arrangement is made in the House Post Office where this person or that person have this responsibility. But that we're going to restore absolute integrity and management of the highest order, I hope with bipartisan support, and then we're going to do the public's business. Now, in the future, if someone came to me and said, for the good of the party, would you step aside? If I thought that leaving the Speaker's office would create an opportunity for the party and the country to improve the operations and reputation of the House, I wouldn't hesitate. But I don't think that's what's needed at this time. I think my responsibility is to do the job I was elected to do, and to carry on the responsibilities and move away, hopefully in a way that brings public confidence to the House, move away from these problems of the past and look to the future.
As I said in the introduction, you've been here 27 years, and you've seen these kinds of situations come where focus goes on a particular individual, and then their stories and the smell of blood comes and all of that. Are you feeling that at all, that you've got a certain periods you've got to get through, or it's going to be tough at the end? You don't see daylight here, or do you see daylight?
No, I'm perfectly confident of what I'm doing. I'm not in a state of terror or excitement or anything else. You're right that in Washington sometimes there's a sort of blood in the water rumor that goes around, and everybody says, you know, is he going to last a week, or is he going to last 2 days, or is the announcement coming tomorrow? The old Mark Twain thing, rumors of my imminent death, are grossly exaggerated. I'm comfortable with the responsibility that I've been given in a difficult time. And when the water gets rough, you have to expect this criticism and complaint. But I think I have very strong support in the Democratic caucus, and I presume to think that I have the respect of members on both sides of the aisle in the Congress. What we need to do together is to repair the reputation of the House, which has been damaged.